Formed over 100 million years ago, the rugged wilderness of Australia's alpine regions are a playground for skiers, snowboarders, hikers and mountain bikers. It also hosts a range of ecosystems, plants and animals. Some are familiar, like eucalypts, cockatoos and wallabies. But the alpine climate has led to the evolution of rare animals that are only found here and nowhere else.
They're an incredible group of animals adapted to living in one of the harshest environments in Australia. They hibernate almost at freezing for 5 months of the year. A lot of people don't associate high elevation areas with reptiles. You don't often think when you're out snowboarding or skiing backcountry that you might be cruising straight over hibernating lizards.
In New South Wales, we work with alpine-she skink, Guthega skink and the mountain skink, and in Victoria we have the alpine bog skink.
There's quite a few knowledge gaps for this species. Reptiles in general are pretty understudied compared to things like mammals.
Should we do a temperature of your body temperature as well?
The alpine-she skink's actually a really charismatic, medium-sized skink, and they're quite slender. They're a bit more snake-shaped and they're really interestingly coloured. They can be sort of majority grey or majority red, pinkish red, or rusty red with black patches on their scales. So this type of skink is most closely related to the blue tongues. These are kind of like a slender form and a much smaller version. They do have a blue tongue, which is really sweet, but they don't flash it like the blue tongues that we know. They do a snake-like flick. They live in subalpine and alpine grasslands. People don't see them very often because they move amongst the grass tussocks mostly, very rarely across the top, and they are looking for ground-dwelling invertebrates to eat, so things like caterpillars and beetles. My research mainly focused on the distribution and the detectability of the species. So part of my project was to really investigate whether they occurred sort of more broadly throughout Kosciuszko National Park. They were primarily known from Perisher Valley. So we did manage to get a much better handle on where the species occurs throughout the grasslands. It's quite extensive but very patchy, and it's important to know that because there's a lot of things going on in the park in terms of development and improvements, but also fire management. And if we don't know where they are, then we don't know how to prioritise habitat protection for them. So if you picture the grassy plateau of the high country in southeast Australia, there's typically forested gullies and deep, steep terrain in between, so it's not the sort of habitat that the species could move through. So there are quite disjunct areas that they occur in. It makes up a very small portion of Australia and it's a very restricted range. And then it's a very attractive place also, and so there's development and there's invasive species that are having quite an impact on the habitat. And the habitat's also projected to change quite a lot with a warming climate. Being reptiles, they obviously have sort of requirement for their thermal regimes, and as vegetation changes and as temperatures warm, they're likely to be pushed up to higher elevations and restricted even further. I really enjoy working with the alpine-she skink because they're a really great animal to come across. They're not seen very often. You don't generally bump into them while you're walking around, although people can do. They will grab onto things and really position themselves in a way that really shows you that they're looking around and paying attention to what's going on around them, and they're just really sort of engaging in that way.
We have mountain skink.
Epic.
Which is pretty sick. My name's Zach Atkins. I'm a herpetologist working for Snowline Ecology. I've been working on threatened lizards particularly for the past 11 years. Guthega skink live up the very top of the mountain. They're only found in 2 locations, here in Kosciuszko National Park and also in Victoria on the Bogong High Plains. They're about 25 centimetres long and they're born sort of jet black with really yellow spotting, really vivid. And then as they grow, their pattern changes fairly dramatically and ends up being a large sort of more drab, stripy brown lizard. And then in the montane area, you have mountain skink. Rather than favouring the treeless habitat that Guthega likes, these lizards like open woodland. Where the trees kick in, that's when you start getting mountain skink. So there's a bit of an elevational separation between the two. The mountain skink is found from Victoria, New South Wales, all the way to the ACT, but they also have a really disjunct population, just in little pockets of suitable habitat. The alpine bog skink is much smaller. They favour the wetter areas in the Alps, so sphagnum bogs and sort of wet heathy areas. But they are really secretive, so they'll often just duck off into the water or into a big clump of sphagnum on approach. Their distribution is quite restricted, so the alpine bog skink is only found in Victoria, just in a few isolated alpine locations. The Guthega skink has some pretty interesting traits. They live in colonies and form family groups within complex burrow systems. So these burrows can have up to 5 entrances and contain up to 8 individual lizards, a male and female pair, and then up to 2 years of offspring. So, you know, the babies are born within the burrow, hang out for a couple of years, and then disperse out. So the mountain skink has been recently listed as endangered, which is why we're out here doing the work. We're hoping to better understand their habitat preferences, their distribution across their range, and also their susceptibility to fire. And we're hoping that at the end of this work we can go into a more dedicated monitoring program, and then that'll set up conservation actions going into the future. When we see a skink out, we get set up, get the noose out, get a mealworm. If they're hungry, they come out, allow you to noose them. And then once they're in the hand, we take, pretty standard morphometric data, and we also take a tail tip for genetics. So genetics is a really important part of all of our endangered species programs now. So this just involves a small tissue sample from the tail, and it gets sent off to the geneticist. They analyse it. It comes back and provides really valuable information on things like population genetic diversity, population structure. It identifies potential habitat corridors that are important for dispersal and gene flow. In the last few years, there's been an increase in rock disturbance at some of these sites. Some of that's not targeted, it's that sort of rock stacking. We have seen a little bit more targeted damage where people are heading out trying to get those Instagram photos for these iconic species, and to do that they're often catching them without specialised equipment like we're using. They pretty much have to lift those rocks, and it's super damaging. The Guthega skink burrow systems is reliant on it being a sealed microclimate where it can maintain temperature and moisture. Once you start ripping rocks, it's over for them, and you've displaced the animal and likely given it a death sentence.
There are many things that we can do to just keep that pressure off and allow them to exist in as good a quality habitat as possible. It's a really wonderful thing to come across an alpine-she skink or one of the many other beautiful reptiles in the subalpine region, and one of the best things you can do is just sort of keep your distance and watch it display its natural behaviour, see what it's doing. You learn so much about something just by watching. If you approach or get in its space, it's more likely to react to you than going about doing what it needs to do. And so leaving them alone is one of the best things you can do for you and for it.
These alpine skinks share their environment with a lot of people year-round. I think it's really important for the long-term management of this species that the community, in particular local communities, get behind these alpine, subalpine environments and the precious species that they contain. Through a shared awareness and passion for these animals is how we will maintain them for future generations to see.